Hello and welcome to Football League World TV. This is the Millwall fan debate, and today I'm joined by London Footie Scene writer and Millwall fan Ryan Loftus to discuss the Lions' January transfer window so far and assess what needs to happen before the end of the month. Ryan, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, Ned. Always good to be on.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us again. And before we get started, just a reminder to everyone, give this video a like, subscribe to Football League World TV on YouTube, and any sort of Millwall or EFL fans watching, please do let us know your thoughts in the comments. What have you made of Millwall's January window so far, and what do they need to do before the end of the month? Well, Ryan, it's sort of the perfect time really to have you on, and you're perhaps the perfect person to come on and chat about Millwall's transfer situation at the moment. Your feature published yesterday about sort of why and how Millwall's approach to recruitment needs to change is definitely worth reading. I'd recommend everyone to head to londonfootballscene.co.uk to read it. But do you want to break sort of down the key points of it for us, as I think that's really the best way to sort of outline your thoughts on the January window as well?
Yeah, it's quite a big topic to tackle, really, like overhauling a club's recruitment. But I think in the last few years, like Millwall haven't really kicked on under Gary Rowett. I think people say that it looked like we were going to since Neil Harris left, and it's not really worked. And it's not necessarily a Gary Rowett problem, but I mentioned this in the piece. It kind of dates back to Neil Harris's last transfer window in charge. The club backed him, spent quite a bit of money, brought in, probably spent over £3 million, brought in a few players, brought in about 8 or 9 players, I think, and a lot of them haven't worked. A lot of them are too old. I mean, the squad now is the second oldest in the league. I think it's 27.3 is the average age. We've got a lot of the signings we make just have no resale value. We'll talk about a few of the outgoings later on. And, we're bringing in kind of steady eddies, like generic professionals who will do a job for a bit, pay money for them, and then ultimately probably leave on a free or at least very cheaply. And with a club like Millwall, when we're not as rich as most of the clubs in the division, we really need to work out how to make money. And recruitment's not an easy job, and bringing in a star and bringing in players that will continuously make money isn't easy. But I think you're seeing sides in the Championship now. Okay, it's not going well for Barnsley this year, but they had good success last year. Look at Luton, Coventry, even Blackpool to an extent, coming up and doing well. They're showing that when you don't have the budget, you have to operate smarter to compete in this Championship. And I think it's something Millwall aren't doing. And, with losing one of our best players potentially at the end of this year, we need to look at how we keep going as a club to avoid relegation and to tackle our debts, really.
Absolutely. And shifting the focus then to the January window as a whole, obviously sort of 5 days now left until the end of the window. Can you give us sort of before we dive too deeply into some specifics, can you give us sort of a general sort of feeling amongst the Millwall fans on the month so far?
Yeah, I think the overriding one currently is probably disappointment. We've had a couple of outgoings that were relatively predictable. Probably a couple more players who could leave that the club has struggled to get moves for. We struggled in the summer to move players on as well. And it seems like it's finally happening now. But really bringing people in, we had potentially a disappointing summer window as well. We got a couple free transfers, a couple loans, but the club's not really in a position to be splashing a load of cash with the pandemic. And so far, one incoming, 2 outgoings of kind of peripheral players, one incoming who I think people are, willing him the best, but maybe jury's out. It's slightly underwhelming. Bids rejected. The club are obviously trying to make moves, but it's difficult.
Sure. Well, we'll get on to that one incoming then. That was, of course, Ollie Burke from Sheffield United, as you say, sort of a player that early on in his career seems to have the world at his feet, really. Huge potential and has shown glimpses of that potential since, but has never really, I guess, really found somewhere to play his best football. Consistency. Gary Rowett will hope he's the coach to bring that out of him, as many have before. But seems like a risk, Ryan. A lot of raw talent there. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a player who hasn't lived up to potential. He's gone for big sums in the past. Over 10 million, I think, on multiple occasions. Played for Leipzig, I think in Spain as well. Had spells in the Premier League with Sheffield United and West Brom. He might be a fit for Millwall in terms of he's got something to prove, and he's coming in as a bit of an underdog, and that maybe matches the Millwall spirit to an extent. But at the end of the day, he will have to produce it on the pitch. Hopefully, he'll get more minutes than he was elsewhere. Not really getting game time at Sheffield United. At West Brom, again, similarly, part of a really big squad. Millwall have a small squad, and having lost 2 strikers, 2 attackers to injury in the window, it's looking like he's going to get minutes. And, you never know, this could be the place for him. It's only a loan. I don't know if there's an agreement to sign him permanently at the end, or if his contract's up. I haven't looked into that situation. But, for 6 months, it could work. It's a bit of a gamble. I think there's a bit of a split in the fan base. I think everyone's of the opinion of give him a chance. He hasn't done it before, but we'll see. I mean, he's got arms the size of most people's legs. So I think he's won a lot of people over with that already. And Rowett's spoken about he wants to change the style of striker we have. We'll see with the outgoings. I think the days of the target man under Rowett are gone, and he wants more explosiveness, more pace, more direct attackers. And, Ollie Burke, fits that mold.
Sure. I mean, you touched on it a bit there. Given the injuries, Ojo, Bradshaw, are you expecting Burke to be used then as sort of in a striker role or out wide? Well, where do you see him sort of fitting in?
I imagine it'll be probably as a striker. It's quite fluid, I think, with Millwall, how Rowett's been playing the system. Obviously, it's pretty much the back 5 week in, week out, but we sometimes play a front 3 with 2 wingers, sometimes play 2 up top with 1 in behind. We've got a lot of strikers who are versatile in that way, like Jed Wallace can play wide or up front. So can Bradshaw to an extent, and Afobe to an extent, but Mason Bennett can play up top or on the wide or behind the striker. So Ollie Burke very much fits that mold of a versatile attacker. So I guess it will just depend on the opponent we're playing. But I imagine we'll see him in a combination of out wide and up front. I'm not even entirely sure where his best position is, really. I mean, obviously he's got the raw pace that you would imagine a winger would use, but more recently people seem to have tried to use him as a striker. So where Gary Rowett will make him fit, it's the jury's kind of out. He only came off the bench last week to not great success. Actually, was kind of shown up by Tyler Bury, one of our youngsters coming through. We signed from Wimbledon a couple of years ago. They both came on at 60 minutes, and Bury had much more of an impact than Burke did. And it's kind of got people questioning the decision to an extent. Obviously, we need the depth, but you've got a 20, 21-year-old here, kind of doing the business. And Burke there not really having much of an impact. But, like I said, give him time and we'll see what he can get out of him.
Absolutely. Well, that's Ollie Burke then. The only addition that Millwall have made so far this week. On to outgoings then, and perhaps the sort of the biggest name one, Matt Smith, physical sort of target man, striker, joined Salford City permanently. I think there was a fair bit of surprise from outside Millwall. It seemed like he could still do a job in the Championship. Surprising to see him go down to League Two. But we were talking just ahead of this off air, Ryan, and you suggested that it was really sort of the right time to move him on.
Yeah, I think the surprise was quite surprising from inside Millwall, at least from my perspective. I think it's potentially a bit of lack of Championship knowledge. People kind of see Matt Smith and they see Millwall and they think Millwall, we just lump it long all the time, which to an extent is true. But to be honest, this season Matt Smith's been barely getting a game. He was starting a couple games early on in the season, but really had little impact. Just a bit of a impact sub off the bench, last 10 minutes, lump it long. And that was very much his role last season as well. He didn't really get any. I think he got 3 goals last season in the league. And, I think that was a drop from 13 in his first season, where he was a lot more of a key figure, obviously half under Rowett and half under Harris. He's 32 now. I think he had an impact when he came in. Millwall fans, he will leave with a good reputation with Millwall fans. He's a really nice guy. He seems like, he's obviously very intelligent. He's doing his, I think his degree up in Manchester as well, part of the reason he moved. But he's well liked by the Millwall fans. He's got a couple really big goals, the winner against Charlton, really late equalisers, late winners. And, he does excite the fans when you've got him in the box. Even nearly scored against Crystal Palace in the FA Cup right at the end, which would have been a fantastic way to go out. But he's just not been around the squad enough or getting game time. And the fact that these moves both came for the next one we'll talk about as well, during a period where we're lacking strikers, shows that how they were viewed by the club. I was surprised actually initially that last season his deal was renewed. He got an extra year on the contract last season. He was due to be released as a free. For then the club to 6 months later just cancel his contract. Again, it comes back to the recruitment and the intelligence of it, of why sign him on and have that on the wage bill when 6 months later you are literally releasing him to go to a League Two club. It seems like a bad choice to have made in the summer.
Absolutely. John Daddy Bodvarsson, the next player to go, he's joined Bolton. He had his sort of contract mutually terminated and signed for sort of a cheaper wage to Bolton to go and play there. An expected departure, perhaps, given his lack of minutes in the first half of the season, and it just never really worked out for him at the end, did it?
No, not at all. He literally has not been anywhere near the squad this season. I think even with all our injury crisis, even in the game where Zach Lovelace, the 15-year-old, 16-year-old, who'll come on to a bit later, when he was on the bench, because Millwall only had 15 players, John Daddy Bodvarsson wasn't making the bench. So that kind of, that speaks to where he was viewed by the club. They tried to get rid of him in the summer. He had options to go abroad and in England, and he turned them down. So it's just come to the point of, he only got a handful of goals, never had an impact. And he's kind of the typical indication of what we were talking about earlier with the spending spree and the bad recruitment. Really, he came in, I think he was 27, 28 when he was signed by Neil Harris for about £750,000, which for Millwall, I know in Championship terms that doesn't sound like a lot these days, but for Millwall that's not an insignificant amount of money. We've only gone above $1 million a few times in our history, and £750,000 for a striker who really by now has no real resale value. And again, another one who we are just cancelling their contract to get rid of him. I think it's the third player in a couple of seasons. We did it with Yuri Skalak last year as well. Player who we spent nearly £1 million on, cancelling their contract just to get him off the wage bill. It's really poor recruitment. Obviously, you don't expect it to go that way. He had been a Championship striker, but in terms of, he's a very good example of that steady Eddie Championship striker. He was never really maybe a 10 goals a season striker, but seemed like a safe signing that has just gone terribly wrong and ended up costing the club a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are the two confirmed departures so far. And next we'll move on to a couple of the sort of transfer rumours. I think really the player that we all thought was going to get the sort of most headlines, certainly ahead of the January transfer window, and it's been the case. Obviously, Jed Wallace, the Millwall's talismanic forward. Situation we need to talk about, out of contract in the summer, of course. A couple of clubs linked. Nottingham Forest seem to be sort of the ones really pushing for a deal. Do you expect we'll see him go beyond that? We'll see him leave before the end of the window, Ryan? And do you think Millwall should cash in? What's your stance?
I think it'll be unlikely at this point. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going to lose him on a free. And Jed Wallace is by far Millwall's best player. I think contributes almost half of our goals and assists every season for the last 4 or 5 seasons, and is just, when he leaves the club, he will go down as, in my eyes, potentially one of Millwall's best ever players. Obviously, I think you have to go quite a way back to find players who are better than him and who have been kind of as important to the side, and replacing him is going to be a massive job. I think obviously Forest came in a few times, and I think the club effectively laughed off the bids, really. I think it was maybe a couple £1 million, and even with 6 months on his contract, he's worth much more than that to the club. I think fortunately, and you have to take the club at face value here, he's had a few injuries during January, so I don't think he's played this month at all. Potentially an opportunity to just keep him out of the limelight. He's come out and said, I think a couple fans have kind of questioned his commitment to the club for not playing. And he actually, that obviously upset him. He came out and replied to one of the tweets saying, he's given everything to this club. He's injured, and, these things happen. And I don't think anyone can really question Jed Wallace's commitment. Obviously, he is getting to the prime of his career, 27, 28, and he wants the chance to play in the Premier League. Obviously, it doesn't look like it's going to work out with a direct move to the Premier League. So potentially that's going to have to be going to a Championship rival and going for free and going for the playoffs, which in the Championship there's no really such thing as a guarantee. And unless he's going to Fulham this season, which obviously they don't need to bring in any more attackers. So to lose him on a free will really hurt. I was speaking before we came on this again. I said 18 months ago we could have got over £10 million. Our record fee and quarter of the debt we're in gone if we'd sold him. And it's a big decision for a club to sell their most important and best player. But sometimes when you are a club like Millwall, you do have to look at these things. And otherwise you find yourself in a situation where in the summer we are going to be looking to replace Jed Wallace, replace his 20 goals and assists a season with no additional money to do it with. And that will be a very hard task and could put us in real trouble next season if the recruitment isn't right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you touched on it, a good point there. As frustrating as it might have been for sort of Millwall fans, Wallace, given what he's done for the club, deserves the benefit of the doubt. Certainly, if and the club, as you say, deserve to be taken on their word about that injury. Do you think there's an argument, Ryan, that derisory as those bids might have been, that accepting that selling him this month might have sort of made more sense looking forward, even though it might have been a sort of admission that the playoff push this season it isn't going to happen?
Yeah, that's exactly why the club, I think, didn't sell. I think to sell him, you are holding your hands up and going, look, we're probably not going to reach the playoffs this year. And funnily enough, while he's been injured in the last 3 or 4 results, it looks like we're not going to be challenging for the playoffs anyway. I think a lot of Millwall fans, especially after the loss to Blackpool on the weekend, have kind of resigned themselves to the fact that the next half of this season might be a bit of a slog. So potentially it would have been sense to sell him. It's really hard, especially at that time. Forest hadn't quite overtaken us yet. Obviously, we hadn't played them yet. And that result, they obviously got the 3 points, could have really gone either way. We were still in the mix. So to sell him to a direct rival, as it was then, would have looked terrible on the club. And I think there's becoming a bit more of a fractious relationship between the board and the CEO of the club and the fan base over the last season or so. And I think to throw selling Jed Wallace to Nottingham Forest onto that fire would really, really spark something in the club. So I think that maybe playing it safe by keeping hold of him, but also, from the financial aspect, do you take the money and just, rather than losing him on a free? It's a big decision, but potentially they might regret not selling him now.
Absolutely, as you say, a really difficult position and a bit of a lose-lose situation by the time you'd got to January. But it's as you sort of talked about and you wrote in that feature, I guess it's about more forward thinking in terms of the recruitment. A signing that perhaps wouldn't have been particularly forward thinking, I don't think, and that's Jordan Hugill, obviously the Norwich City striker, the 29-year-old on loan at West Brom, 1 goal in 20 appearances this season, for sort of being emblematic of Albion's lack of consistency, I guess, in front of goal. A signing that you think could work, though, Ryan? It seems like now a couple of dominoes will have to fall into place for that to happen. But do you think he'd be a player well received at Millwall?
Well received. I think it would be met to large swathes of apathy, really. He has previously done well in the Championship. He's not ever really been fantastic in the Championship. I know he's had a couple of good spells. Once well at Preston and did well at QPR last season, but he's never been an amazing striker. It'd be very typical of, like I say, discussing that piece, and like we said before, the kind of recruitment Millwall have at the moment. It's who's available and who's a little bit of a name. They're not. Yeah. It doesn't feel like they're stretching themselves to find an interesting target. And I know that's really hard in January, in particular. So potentially you take them just to bulk out the squad. I imagine it would just be a loan till the end of the season. He's been back out. He's get signed by a Premiership club, then go on loan to Championship. Seems to be Jordan Hugill's kind of modus operandi for the last few years. So if we have him for 6 months, you might get 5 or 6 goals. You might get none. So I don't think it would set the switchboards alight. But at the moment, we've got 1 striker on the books, and Ollie Burke just come in now, making it 2. So it might not be the worst move in the world.
Certainly, and perhaps a slightly more exciting move that sort of came out. Multiple offers reportedly made by Millwall for Derby County playmaker, sort of attacking midfielder Louis Sibley, the biggest of 450k. But that appears to be off now with Quantuma. Derby's administrators understood to have told the club that he won't be leaving this month. worth a go, Ryan, certainly, and perhaps a positive step in terms of Millwall's recruitment.
Yeah, definitely. It's the sort of player that they should be looking at. I don't think, again, I'm not sure the fan base were totally convinced by him. Obviously, he burst onto the scene and has kind of dwindled a bit since. But obviously, in Derby County situation, it's potentially hard to flourish as a young player. But he's not necessarily kicked on as much as people thought he would. But I mean, a creative playmaker is someone that Millwall squad's been lacking for 3 or 4 seasons now. The club, I think, have tried to bring people in. I think we had in the summer or last summer had bids for Luke Freeman rejected, or he turned down the club. And it's somewhere that we are desperate. We cannot create chances. We cannot score goals. I think signing strikers endlessly won't necessarily solve it. We do need to kind of look at the root cause. And Louis Sibley, could well have been an option, but 450k for was he 20 now, a 19, 20-year-old English creative player. I know Derby are in administration and potentially then you get a bit of a cut price, but even 450k seems particularly cut price. So, maybe the club are trying, but I don't know how realistic those bids were ever going to be. I know in the summer, we kind of went in for Josh Windass from Sheffield Wednesday, again, trying to hit a club that have been struggling financially. But they, again, pretty much told us, it's £3 or £4 million. We're not, although we're in trouble, we're not selling one of our prized assets cheaply. So it's a bit of a face the reality of when we're at. We can't necessarily afford to go out and just spend £1 million. And whether that's because of mistakes we made in the past and our financial situation now, could have been a player we needed, style of player as well. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And it doesn't look like they've got any other options in that position either.
Yeah, another move that won't be happening this month, Dion Sanderson, a rumoured target. Obviously, the Wolves centre-back spent the first half of the season at Birmingham, looked really impressive. Now at QPR. Is that an area you were expecting Rowett to look to strengthen? Do you think there could be any movement in terms of a new centre-back before the end of the month?
No, not remotely. They kind of came out of the blue, that one. Sanderson is a good player. I think he's done well at Birmingham. He did well at Sunderland last year as well. He looks very impressive, and he looks like he'll go on to, to at least be a championship level centre back. But potentially they look to him because he can play right back as well, and he has a lot of history of playing in a back three. So he adds depth. Mill will only have one right back on the books after we let Marlon Romeo go at the end of the summer, out on loan to Portsmouth. So I can understand why potentially they were looking at him. Daniel Ballard, who we've got on loan from Arsenal, and Ryan Leonard, who has kind of been a fill-in centre-back / right-back, even though he's a predominantly midfielder. They're both out injured still for another month or so. I think they both suffered 3 or 4 month injuries a little bit earlier in the season. So potentially I can understand the reason for bringing in depth there. But, rather than bringing in depth, potentially the fans would say, well, why don't we not play a back 5? If we're running out of centre-backs, go to a back 4 for a bit. And we've got 6 midfielders on the book. Maybe we bulk up the midfield and change it around that way rather than just bringing in endless centre backs. And also, we've got Hayden Muller's just come back from St Johnstone on loan. He didn't really have a lot of game time there, but he is a good prospect. He looks good with his feet. Potentially needs to kind of bulk out a bit. We've got Alex Mitchell on loan at Leyton Orient at centre back doing quite well. And I think we're getting to the point where, like I say, because of these kind of endless signings of not real much excitement, steady Eddie kind of signings, would the fans especially rather see Alex Mitchell, who's 20 and from the academy, given a chance in the first team, if it's just for cover? Hayden Muller's now back at the club. I think they're trying to loan him back out, but they might keep him for cover. Why not just, if we're looking for depth, just use him? He's played right back before, he's played centre back. The fans, I think, at this point, especially where it doesn't look like we're going to be challenging much for the playoffs, let's just bed these young players in and give them a chance. If they're going to be playing, 1 game in every 4 or 3 or 4 games, give them a go. And I think they'll get a bit more slack than Dion Sanderson on loan would get really at the club.
Yeah, I think you're right there in the sense that fans, on the back of what looks set to be a frustrating window for Millwall, would certainly appreciate, I guess, a proactiveness to use the second half of the season, not waste it, chasing a dream that perhaps already looks out of reach. One of said sort of young players is 16-year-old Zach Lovelace. We talked earlier. He's sort of extensively been linked with the exit doors as some of these sort of upcoming teenagers do. From a Millwall perspective, what's the stance of fans there? Is it one way you feel like be ashamed to see him go, or do you think he could be someone that the club uses to raise a bit of funds to sort of look to build moving forward?
Yeah, I don't think any fans want to see him go. He's well, he's only just turned 16 as well. So he was 15 on the when he made his debut against Coventry last week. Obviously, it was COVID impact and he came on, but he has been on the bench since. And he's obviously a player the club rate really highly. I think he's been playing with the under-23s for the majority of the season. And at 15, and he's been training with the first teams. And that's just, he looks like a very good talent. And I think what's frustrating for Millwall fans is that we've had a lot of players, through EPPP, which, from my perspective is a terrible, terrible deal that should never have been implemented. Through that, we have lost a lot of our best young prospects. A couple have gone to Man City, a couple have gone elsewhere at about 14 or 15. And when you're a club like Millwall, who aren't a Category 1 academy, and you're surrounded by Category 1 academies, and all the northern teams are now sending scouts down to London, it's so frustrating that it gets even harder for our really, really top youngsters to break through because they will just go. And what's particularly frustrating about Zach Lovelace is that he's got all this way, and okay, he's come through to the first team, slightly because of COVID, but it doesn't look like anyone was looking at him a year ago or a year or two ago. And now, because someone's just, seen an article of a 15-year-old being on the bench, that they all want in. So that's particularly frustrating. The club are powerless in this situation. If Zach and his family want to sign a deal with, I think Leicester, Brighton and Rangers, I think are linked. If he wants to sign a deal with them, he's fully within his rights to. And it's up to him and his parents to decide what's best for him. And if that is game time at Millwall, if they can speak to him and say, look, when you turn 17 or even from 16, we're going to have you in the squad every week and we're going to start getting you game times. Does he prioritise that? Does he prioritise the money or the chance of game time higher up? It is up to him. I think the money, the tribunals work that realistically, I don't think you get enough for what these players are worth. I think Fulham had a similar gripe when they lost Harvey Elliott, who realistically a player they could have got £10 million for and ended up getting pennies in comparison. So the club would get a bit of cash, probably not as much as they'd want to. And I think from a fan's perspective, I don't know if everyone understands the EPPP, so they might blame the club for letting him go when really they are powerless. So it's another one where no fan in the country wants to see their best youngsters just being poached by big teams that will probably just release them in 3 or so seasons.
Yeah. Absolutely. Moving on then to sort of the last 5 days of the window, I think as we talked about, you mentioned earlier, and we talked about briefly sort of before the start, Rowett, talked about signing some more young, mobile, up-and-coming strikers, changing the approach for Millwall and maybe going to change that reputation as sort of a direct team. Fans will obviously love that, but are you expecting to see anything in terms of new arrivals before the end of the window?
Expect might be a strong word. I think hope might be in there. Again, we're in that weird situation where I think with the last couple of results throughout January as well, it has almost changed our perspective on the season. So, like you mentioned earlier, it becomes the question of, do you look to chase a lost cause or do we plan for the future? And, in terms of Rowett wanting to change the style of players we're bringing in, we've got a lot of good young players out on loan. Like I mentioned, Tyler Bureau's been brought back. Well, he's brought back from Hartlepool because he tore his hamstring, and he's now been in and around the squad. Came on against Blackpool and was arguably our man of the match within half an hour. He has always looked really exciting. Against Palace in the FA Cup again, came on and looked like to change the game. At Hartlepool, we went out. I think he only played a handful of games before injury, but he'd scored, I think, 5 goals in 4 games. A couple really, really good goals as well. And he was playing as a striker there when he's actually a winger. And that's always a good sign of adaptability and ability. So we have him coming through. I think the fans would like to, rather than sign another winger or striker, let's play Tyler and see how we can do. Similarly, we've got Isaac Alafe out on loan at Sutton. They're going great guns. He was there last season, got help get them promoted from the National League, doing great again. If we're looking for these young, vibrant strikers, I think a lot of fans are saying, why not bring him back? And, I think he's a very similar player to Benica Fobi. Really good work rate, really good natural instinct for goal. And while Afobi's at the club, albeit on loan, potentially that's someone for him to learn from and build up a good relationship with and see how they play. And, we're lacking strikers now. I think a lot of fans would like to see those players come back in. I think Rowett's doubled down that Alafe's not going to be coming back. So, again, I think Millwall fans would rather have Alafe than Hugill. But it looks like the club are determined to bring in probably another loan signing to just bolster the ranks and get through the end of the season, really, which might end up being another disappointing window for the Lions.
Absolutely. As you say, perhaps no action at all and no action in terms of new signings might be the best thing moving forward for Millwall. Well, that's everything from us on the Millwall fan debate today, but there's still some more fantastic stuff on Football League World TV to come. Alfie Burns and Toby Wilding will be highlighting the 3 Championship players whose future remains uncertain ahead of the end of the window, including, I'd imagine, Jed Wallace. That's at 1:30 p.m. And then at 4 p.m, I'll be on the panel alongside Chris Gallagher with George Douglas, our host for the EFL Transfer Zone show. That just leaves me to say thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks everyone for watching.